Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? It's 10 minutes to midnight. You guys are going to think I'm a vampire now. No, so some of these episodes may be a little later now that my son is running cross country. Like today we had a meet where it was 40 minutes away. So it gets a little bit time consuming. And normally I'm pretty much done by the time the kids get out of school, unless there's a trial to cover. But today was just insanity. Insanity. All right. So first of all, I had to take the kittens to go get neutered. And I always feel terrible taking them anytime I have to take them because, it's painful. But at the same time, let's just say a prayer. It calms their little tails down because they are buck wild, y'all, keeping me up half the night. And so I take them, drop them off, and I get home. And guess what I see? Sherlock with a hummingbird in his mouth. And I love hummingbirds, and I've had to take my feeders down. And next year, I'm going to have to rig something like really super high because Sherlock is, it's amazing how high that cat could jump. Okay, so I get the hummingbird, like I get Sherlock to drop it. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture of the hummingbird real quick. Right, so this is when I got him, right? Okay, on the left, he's looking a little worse for the wear, right? He's all ruffled, missing a few feathers because he was trying to fly away. So I was actually really, really worried about him at first. So I started giving him some nectar. So I made like the sugar water. You're not supposed to use the red kind, by the way. It's not good for their bodies. Just make the sugar water. It's like 1 part sugar, 4 parts water or something like that. You can look it up. Anyway, so I had a little dropper and he started perking up. So I had him in a shoebox with some boxes and I hear this chirp. And so this is literally beside where I sit and I had him on the podcast table and he's poking his head out, looking at me, y'all. And he's chirping. So we became like best friends. And then finally, I want to show you this little video. I hope it doesn't have music in it. But if it does, I may have to like pull it. But this was later. Kind of have to talk over it because it does have music. But you can see little dude was doing so much better. He was like drinking. And the one thing I saw about hummingbirds, they have a little frowny face.
Slow down there, buddy.
Okay, so he was doing better. So finally, I take him outside once, and he tries to fly, and then he just like nosedives in the grass. Feed him some more, take care of him. I have a little heating blanket inside there on low just to keep him warm. Finally, he flies off. I think he did fine. He was playing dead, so it was really, really kind of scary at first because I thought, Sherlock, come on, it's a little hummingbird. All right. Also, comments, emails, inboxes. I haven't even touched those in 2 days, guys. I'm not ignoring anybody. I've got a ton of messages and I do like to get back to those. One thing I don't think that I mentioned yesterday, maybe I did and it's just late and I don't know what's up. But the judge told the jury at the very beginning to stay off of MySpace. Oh boy, bless it. He seems like a really sweet guy. Except for when, he banned the video and audio. Anyways, all right. So I will give you guys a little bit of a trigger warning before we show. There's nothing graphic. They don't show the bodies on TV. But they did show some crime scene stuff today, and there is some blood in it. So, anyways, music fact of the day before we get started. So the song "Stairway to Heaven," which I love. I especially love it when they start jamming, like in the second half. But the very first time they played that in public, they were booed, almost off stage. Interesting. And also, I think, is it Jimmy Page, like, hates playing that song. He hates it. Or maybe I don't know if it's Robert Plant. Anyways, all right, let's get started because it's late and we have a lot to go through. These kittens are so super cute. I wish you guys could see them. They're all cuddled up, probably like comforting each other after such a traumatic day. They're half the men they used to be, for sure. All right, so day 1 of testimony. Real quick, I want to say when there is somebody who has opted to not be audio or video recorded, and you have Twitter, I have found that Evan Millward, I think I said that right, Evan Millward, and um, I'm sorry, Anjanette Levy from Law and Crime. They are amazing to follow on Twitter. They, as soon as there's a break, they come out and will update you, and then they just get it on their Twitter. So it's really beneficial for me to be able to do what I do. So give them a follow. Also, Anjanette does a nightly recap from her point of view inside the courtroom. It's great. I'm going to start retweeting that and putting that on Facebook as well. Evan tweeted out today that the families were visibly upset every time the bodies were shown on the screen, obviously. He said that Frankie and Hannah Gilley's pictures were very clear and were gruesome. And I can just imagine. So first up was Bobby Jo Manley, and she opted out of being recorded. And she is the sister of Dana Rhoden, and she is the one you hear on the 911 call. And she's also the one that found Chris Sr., Gary, Frankie, and Hannah Gilley, and also found the babies and got them out of the house. So remember, she was paid to do these chores around the house for Chris Sr., and that's why she was there. She also had her friend Billy Morgan and someone named Emma with her that day. She said that on the stand that the door was locked, which was odd. So she let herself in with a hidden key that Chris had on the property. And she went into Chris Sr.'s bedroom, where she found Chris Sr. and Gary piled on top of each other and covered with a blanket. When she took the blanket off, she knew they were dead. So trigger warning, if you don't like blood, don't look. I'm going to show you a picture from inside Chris Sr.'s house. If you remember yesterday in openings, the prosecutor talked about the drag marks, and there was blood, and also the vice grip that they found on the floor that normally Chris kept in his pocket. So trigger warning is coming up now. I'm going to show you the drag marks there, where Chris and Gary were drugged through the house. If you remember, Chris Sr. was shot kind of in the doorway. Also in that top left, you can see one of those vice grips. I try not to show, like, I would never show a body. It's just, I don't mind looking at that kind of stuff, but it's just not something I would do on here. But you can see stuff like this on a regular news station in Ohio tonight. So I thought mainstream media's put it out. So, I'm okay with doing that. Plus, it gives insight into how gruesome this crime is. I don't know if we will see the inside of bedrooms. I'm sure within 8 weeks we will. And as long as there's no victim on there, I will show it. So I'm gonna click this off now. And I'll always try to give you a little trigger warning before I do it. So Bobby Jo said she next went over to Frankie's to let him know she had just found his dad dead. She walked in the house. Now, this is what kind of confused. I don't know if maybe she just forgot to say that Brentley helped. She had to help Brentley open that little chain link door or whatever. But she said that she walked in the house yelling for Frankie, didn't get an answer. And Frankie's son, Brentley, was behind the bedroom door and said, "Daddy's got a lot of blood." She walked into the bedroom and found both Frankie and Hannah dead. And the baby was trying to breastfeed his dead mother. Just so cruel. Trigger warning, I'm going to put a picture of their son up here that has blood on him. This one is also on mainstream media. He is much older, so I'm okay with showing this picture of him as a baby. Normally, I try to blur out the faces, but this was, 6 years ago? So, he's a little bit older. Trigger warning. It's not super graphic, but you can see on the very top of his head, bottom of his feet, his legs, his belly, inside the ear. He had a lot of blood, back of the head. In the right-hand photo, you can see on the foot, just he was laying in between his dead parents. And the EMT who testified later in the day also said that his diaper was saturated in blood. Poor baby. I'm glad he was that young, and most of all, if there's any silver lining in this case, it is that they spared the lives of the innocent children. The situations they left them in, they don't get any kind of prize from me. But anyways, so the defense, or I'm sorry, let's see. She took the kids and went outside. And after police arrived, she went to the sheriff's office and gave a DNA sample, a written statement. She had her hands swabbed for gunshot residue, and they took her shoes and her clothes as evidence. On cross defense, attorney John Parker asked how long she had done jobs for Chris Sr. around his house, and she said for a few years. He said there were rumors of Chris Sr. being involved in illegal cockfighting and drugs, and he asked if she knew anything about either one. She said she did feed chickens on his land, but did not know anything about marijuana. And then he asked if she ever saw Jake Wagner's at Chris Sr.'s before, and she said she had seen him there a few times. I think at some point Jake did live, I guess it was because it was 30 days prior when that Dana had moved in. So I'd heard at one point he lived with them, so maybe that's, where she saw him. The defense asked if she knew anything about drug deals, specifically marijuana grow operations involving Chris Sr., or if she knew anything about any trips to Mexico. Okay, first of all, what does this have to do with anything? It's not like we're looking at the cartel anymore. I mean, we have two confessions. So I'm not sure why they're going this drug route, or maybe if they're just going to say this was like something gone wrong between Billy and Chris Sr. But it's just really weird. So Bobby Joe said she knew about some trips where he would be gone a few days, but nothing about him being out of the country. She also said he did have security cameras on the property, but she didn't know anything about drugs. At one time, I didn't know that she was in a relationship with Kenneth Rhoden, who was the final victim that was found. He was the one that lived out, on the land that didn't have running water. She was on the stand around 2 hours. There wasn't much I could put together because she opted not to be recorded. And the next witness also opted out of being recorded. So the first half of the day was just, I don't know. I wish they'd find something to focus on because the painting, her hand is all jacked up. I don't know what's up, man. I watch Baumgartner Restoration on YouTube. It's my jam. It helps me go to sleep. It chills me out. And he always says hands are the hardest thing to paint. And you can really botch them up. And I don't know, man. I glanced and thought they had crime scene photos up. I'm not even kidding y'all. I'm not trying to be rude, but like they need to get something off that hand. So Billy Morgan was next. He was with Bobby Joe the day she found the bodies. And he didn't know, bless his heart. He said he didn't know how old he was because they were asking everybody, how old are you? He said he knows he was born in the 70s and he could not read or write. According to reports, excuse me, he was quiet on the stand and often had his head down. So he knew Chris Sr. only for about a month before the murders. He was doing some odd jobs for him around Chris Sr.'s house. He knew Jake from being around during Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. And he was asked about drug deals or marijuana on the property. And he said he didn't know anything about it, but sometimes if he walked past the barn, he would smell some weed. He wouldn't go in there or anything. But he said personally, he wouldn't know what pot looked like or marijuana looked like if he saw it. On cross-exam, he was asked if he ever saw Billy Wagner at Chris Sr.'s. And he said that, sometimes he would come see Chris Sr. and they would sit inside the truck and talk. So the next witness was James Manley, who is Dana Rhoden's brother, and he allowed himself to be filmed. Can I just say, he seems like such a gentle, sweet soul. And I know a lot of people like James Manley growing up in the South. Just seems like a very straightforward sweetheart of a guy. And, you have to think Bobby Joe, James Manley, Leonard Manley, who is dead now, that was Dana's dad and the grandparent to, great-grandparent to Frankie and Hannah Mae and Sophia and the new baby. What they saw that day, will never leave their mind. I mean, it's interesting because I remember in the Travis Alexander trial, the crime scene photos were very hard for his sisters to and his brother to look at. And his sister, made a post that like the trial and what happened to him sometimes overshadows all of the good memories she had. And I can see where that happens. But so anyways, James is 46. He's been married to a lady named April for about 26 years. Dana lived right down the road from his house, less than a mile when she got her new place, and he helped her move in and also clean the yard. So I heard something, y'all, because it's like midnight, but it's the FedEx plane. Every night between like now and 12:10 it goes over, but I just sound like growling, y'all. I'm tired. Oh, the Lord help me. So he helped her move in and clean her yard. And he said Chris Sr. and Dana's relationship after the divorce was pretty much the same it was before the divorce. They seemed to get along great. And he said Frankie did jobs remodeling houses. And James did the demolition derby with Frankie. He was very passionate about that. And he said Frankie had been around demolition derbies from the time he was a baby. So Frankie liked to hunt, and the prosecutor said Frankie had chickens and asked if they were fighting chickens. And he said he thought so. You could tell by the way they looked. They're tied to barrels so they don't get together and fight. And he doesn't know if Frankie was actually involved in it or not. But he said he kind of thought maybe. So on April 22nd, James had a logging job and he wasn't working that day because it had rained. So he was working on the four-wheeler behind his house when he saw Billy, the guy who had just testified and been with Bobby Joe and they found the bodies. He was at Dana and his and Dana's parents' house, which is right there. It's like us. Me and my family all live right here together. I mean, if I'm outside and sneeze, one of them can hear it. But he saw them leave behind Billy. And he said the way his parents took off in the car, he knew something was up. So he got in his truck and he followed them and they went to Frankie's house. He said Bobby Joe's car and his parents were in the road and he wondered what the heck's going on. So they were out of their cars and he gets out and walks up to the yard and sees Frankie's little baby Ruger, who I just showed you a picture of. He was covered in blood and Bobby Joe was holding Ruger. He still didn't have any idea what had happened. And he asked Bobby Joe, what's the situation here? She told him Chris Sr. and Gary were dead and Frankie and Hannah Gilley were dead there as well. They went inside Frankie's house and with his dad and his son, he has adult children, and also Bobby Joe. Frankie was supposed to work that day with his son, with James's son. So he sees the bodies. There's blood everywhere. He said on the bed, on the walls, all over the dead bodies. Nobody touched anything. So he went back outside to go to his sister Dana's house to tell her what was happening, that her ex-husband and her son and his fiance and Gary are dead. So when he got there, he knocked on the door. And as he was knocking, that door kind of crept open. So he was yelling Dana's name and got no response. And he kept yelling her name and finally went to her bedroom. Now, I'm going to put some pictures up here. I will put the link in the description for you guys. This is the front of Dana's house that he went to. Also here is on the left is open door that goes inside. And then on the right is kind of the, I guess, the living room area. Inside here, you're going to see he talks about walking down a hallway that was really dark. Top left corner, you really can't even see the hallway. It's so dark. So that's the hallway to Dana's room. And when he got to her room, it was really dark in there and he didn't see her. So he kind of felt on the bed and he felt her under the covers. And he was trying to tap her to get her awake. And so he kind of moves up towards her head and sees a pillow on her face. And so he tries to pull it off and it's stuck to her. And at that point, he knows she's been murdered as well, because, just it was sticking to her face. He didn't go into little Chris or Hannah Mae's room. He did hear the baby Kylie crying, but he just ran out of the house, and you can't fault him for that. That is so traumatic and just really, oh man, I just hate it for these people. On the right is Dana's bedroom, and on the bottom left is a garage. So he went to his own house after that and told his wife that Frankie, Hannah Hazel, he called her Hazel the entire time. Dana, Chris Sr., and Gary were all dead. So they went back to get baby Kylie, the newborn, the 5-day-old. And they went, he saw the cops coming up the road and flagged one of them down and said, there's at least one in there who's dead. And he was at Dana's house. At the time, he did not know that Hannah Mae and little Chris were dead as well. The police had his wife April draw a picture of the layout of the residence so they could go in and clear it. Police didn't tell him that Hannah Mae and little Chris were dead. They brought the baby out, the authorities did, and then they checked the newborn out in a cop car to make sure she was okay. Because all these babies, as you saw with Ruger, he was covered in blood. And we know that baby Kylie was sleeping right beside her mom as well. So authorities eventually took the newborn to the hospital, and his James's wife April rode with the baby to the hospital. So he was at Dana's, he estimates, for about an hour and a half, and then he went back. Let's see, they took him to the police station and gave a statement. They wanted his boots. And I love this guy. He said, no, these are $200 boots and they're brand new. You're not getting my boots. So they took pictures of his boots. They made him leave his truck at Dana's, and he called his parents to come pick him up. They all ended up at the church on Union Hill Road where the authorities were staging all the family members. And he said he found out that Kenneth had been murdered while he was at the church as well. They showed him these photos of Dana's bedroom, the living room, the garage. He said that Hannah was using the garage for pictures that Frankie's oldest son's mother and Hannah Mae were taking, trying to take some professional pictures. They had everything set up out there and had some cameras. And there were a couple of photos they did not show on screen. And you could tell they must have been of the crime scene or maybe even of Dana. He was gulping hard. And I always watch that. And this is one picture as well that was in Dana's garage. It's kind of hard to see on here. It says, Dana loves Chris. It's got a heart. And then it says, we heart you. And I thought that was sweet. They seem to have had a really, good relationship, as it should be. Unless there's something crazy going on. So on cross-exam, I don't know where he was going with this, y'all. I think he was a little hard on James myself. None of these questions made sense. Maybe they will when they present their case. But he asked how long Christina and Dana were married. He said Dana was around 16 or 17 when they got married. And he's asked how much older Chris was than Dana. And James is like, I have no idea. So the defense says Chris and Dana had a good relationship when they divorced, and Chris was very generous with his money and would help Dana. And James said yes. He was asked, do you know where he worked? James said for himself, and also at Big Bear Lake. He was also asked, were you aware of his marijuana grow operations? And James said no. He said, you didn't go to work because it had been raining, right? Did you ever go to Chris's house? He said sometimes. And he asked about the day of the murders, and he said no. He said, then you went to Frankie's. Yes. You went inside and saw him and Hannah. And the defense says Hannah Mae, and Billy corrects him and says Hannah Gilley. So he asked, was there anyone else in there where you were? So James says my dad, my sister, and my son was. He's asked, did you all gather in any room at the hallway where Frankie's bedroom was? Did anyone remove anything from Frankie's house? He said, not that I know of. The defense says you went up to Dana's to check on her and tell her what happened, and her door was unlocked. He said, when I knocked, it opened up. He said, now, when you're at Dana's room, can you see Hannah Mae's bed? And James said, no, not at the doorway. There's a hallway. The defense says there's a hallway that kind of goes from Dana's room to Hannah's. And James said, yes. The defense says, you said Dana was covered up. You couldn't see her body. No. How long were you all inside together? And he said, less than a minute. He said, did your wife go to the hospital with the baby? Yes. You were never at the hospital? No. You knew Hannah had a baby recently? Yes. You heard the baby cry? He says, yes. Had you met the baby before this? Why is that relevant? He says, no. Did you know who the father of the baby was? And James said, Charlie Gilley. He's then asked, do you know Jake Wagner? And James says, I knew of him. He says, have you seen Jake Wagner ever? He said, at Thanksgiving or Christmases at the Manley house. So then he says, you had your own cell that day. It wasn't working. And he said it was out of time. So it must have been a prepaid phone where you're given so many minutes and then it's kind of dead. Doesn't work. You have to get another one. And then the defense says your wife had her own phone. He says, yes. And then the defense says you used her phone to call your boss. Yes. This here, I do remember reading something about it. I'm going to have to go back and clarify. I cannot remember for the life of me the context of this, but it says, did you receive a text from Jake that morning? No. On your wife's phone? James says no. Then the defense says, were you questioned by authorities about that? And he said, yes. So he said, back over at Chris Sr.'s, you didn't know he grew weed? You didn't know he was building a big barn? James says no. Did you know he had pigs? Yes. Where did he keep them? And he said, in like a barn area in the front yard. He said, how many pigs did he have? He said, I don't know. Then he said, did he have indoor dogs? And so James names off Paisley and Chance, and he said one other, he could not remember their name. Then he's asked, did he have an electronic fence on his property? And it's the kind where the dogs have the collar. So if they go past it, they get a jolt. And James says yes. The defense asks, had the dog Chance ever been mean to other people that you know of? And James says no. So then the defense asks him, did Frankie have pets? And James says chickens and dogs. And where were the dogs? He said behind Frankie's place. Were the dogs inside that day? James says, I didn't see any dogs. So the defense asked, was Frankie into fighting roosters or chickens? And James said he could be. He said, what about Chris? James says, couldn't tell you. So we're going to stop right here and do our paid sponsor of the week, who I'm very grateful for. This is how I get to do what I do, and I love what I do. So it's time for a word from our paid sponsor, Gladskin, y'all. I love this stuff, not even just saying it. But those of you who have little ones, as a parent, it's really hard to see your child struggle with itchiness and discomfort from eczema. You're probably hesitant to try new products and just want the best for your little baby. Thankfully, Gladskin is safe and gentle on your baby skin. And parents, if your child has eczema, know that you're not alone. Childhood eczema is really common, and lots of family and kids struggle with dry, inflamed, and itchy skin. And you're probably not comfortable using strong medicines and creams, and rightfully so. But now there's Gladskin, which is a steroid-free and clinically proven to reduce eczema symptoms safely and quickly. My little great niece tried it like literally within a day. She was much better, was not itching as much. Gladskin is a new category of skin treatment that is made for people of all ages with eczema prone, acne prone, and rosacea. Yeah, I was late. Prone skin is so effective that 91% of users, adults and children both, who tried their top selling eczema cream reported a significant improvement in just 7 days. It's so effective that 91% of users recommend it to their friends and family. And for babies, Gladskin's new oatmeal formula is non-toxic and free of steroids, as many are. And it's also free of common irritants. Pediatricians and dermatologists love Gladskin, even for the tiniest of babies. So if you've been frustrated with your treatment options, don't wait to try Gladskin. I'm going to give you a good deal. They're offering my listeners 15% off plus free shipping on your first order at gladskin.com/whattheworld. That's gladskin.com/whattheworld for 15% off and free shipping. Gladskin.com/whattheworld. All right, let's get back to the testimony. So the defense asked, did Chris Sr. travel out of town much? James says, couldn't tell you. Do you know who he worked with at his job? Is it Big Bear Lake? And he said his brother and the owner. The defense says, did he and Chris travel? I believe he's talking about the owner. And he said maybe a couple of times. And do you know where they went? And James says no. I don't know what this is about Mexico. I don't know if it's going to be something they're going to try. I really feel like the defense is going to try to pull drugs into some kind of a motive that, we know Billy was working with him. Part of the thing that night was a lucrative drug deal from California. What's interesting to me is none of the summaries I've read from the testimony that was off camera or anything I watched today ever mentioned George. So, that was just something that kind of stuck out to me. His name was never mentioned. This was all about everybody else. So, he said Dana had recently moved in. Yes. Chris Sr. bought it for her. And James says they were buying it. The defense said, did he pay cash or loan? And James said part was cash and part was loan. So the defense says, do you know how much cash he put down? And he said, don't know. Did you know Billy? And he said, note of him. He's very Southern. Like I know Ohio's not Southern, but I know people that talk just like him. Note of him. He said he met him once or twice at Chris's. They were friends. He said, I know they talked. Did you know Chris Sr. would have a 4th of July party? Here we go. Another thing that I guess is going to come in. James said, yeah, we had fireworks. Everyone looked forward to it every year. The defense said, did people drink? And James said, some. The defense asked, did Chris provide the alcohol? And he said, you brought your own. I love him, y'all. His little act. Yeah. He just reminds me of so many guys around here. So the defense says the fireworks was something that everybody enjoyed. And James said, yes, they were huge fireworks. And so the defense says between Chris and Frankie, between their properties, they would put a big flatbed trailer in between their properties on the road. And that's where they would launch the fireworks from. So he was asking James if this was the case. And he said, yes. So then they were done with him, and bless his heart, he did really, really good. I thought he did great on the stand considering the trauma he's been through. And he seems super credible and really sweet. And yeah, seemed like good people. The next witness was a deputy who opted out of being recorded. And his name was, I believe, Sergeant Johnathan Chandler with the Pike County Sheriff's Office. He was the first deputy that was dispatched to those murders and initially dispatched to Chris Sr.'s house. He was the officer that was flagged down at the home of Frankie by James and his family. So the sergeant said the baby was covered head to toe in blood and that the family was frantic and very upset, very emotional, and rightfully so. This is unimaginable. So you think about it. You take pretty much your whole family, your immediate family, your crew, and then you find out they've all been murdered. I can't imagine going to my brother's house, going to my parents' house. It is just, it's so, for the survivors, just can't even fathom the loss and the emptiness and what they have had taken away from them. It just is insane. So the sergeant said they went inside and verified that Frankie and Hannah Gilley were dead. He said he came to that conclusion due to the pools of blood in the middle of the bed. He also knew Frankie had gunshot wounds and bruising to the head because he observed that. He had clocked in at 7 a.m. that morning, and he worked that case until 2 a.m. And the very last thing he did was help BCI remove the bodies of Dana, Hannah Mae, and little Chris from their homes. When photos of some of the victims were shown on screen, the Rhoden family just absolutely broke down. And there was one female juror who seemed to be in her 20s, looked at that, and then very quickly looked away. They said that the jury responded to those photos. And you're asking ordinary people to see things that most ordinary people don't see and don't want to see. It's people that are very, law enforcement or EMTs, people who do the jobs that we can't imagine doing. And I think hats off to them for having to walk into these scenes. And not only that, but deal with the families on scene. It has to be stuff that sticks with you. This case, I'm sure anybody who set foot in that house or was part of this investigation in any way will never, ever forget this. And hopefully will never have a case of this magnitude ever again. So the fourth witness or the next witness he was after the sergeant, was an EMT who responded to the scene at Frankie's. His name is Justin Waring. He was kind of brief on that. Wasn't a whole lot. He was dispatched to Union Hill Road. And he said either dispatch or coworkers said it was an assault with a lot of blood, but the EMTs did not know what was going on. He didn't know anybody was dead, and 3 squads responded to that scene. He said it can take 20 to 30 minutes to get to Union Hill Road, depending on how fast they're driving and also traffic. So he talked to a man, he didn't know who he was, in the yard and asked what was happening. And the person asked, "Do you have more people coming out?" He said, "There's a bunch of bodies." And he pointed to all the residences and told how many were in each. So he needed to go in, the EMT needed to go in and verify that Frankie and Hannah Gilley were deceased. And he said it was very obvious just from looking that they were deceased. And let me throw up here Hannah and Frankie's house. I don't know if they covered that or if they had that themselves. You can see the crime scene tape, and then you can see, I thought that was a stretcher in the front yard, but actually I think that's maybe something you work on cars with. Yeah, I'm just glancing, y'all. I'm just seeing if I have any more pictures, and I don't. So he could see clearly they were deceased. He said when you enter, there's a crib, and on the other side of the crib is where Hannah and Frankie were laying. So he walked in enough to see them while his partner was out getting a heart monitor. And he said it was obvious with the amount of blood, and he'd observed no breathing. So he obviously realized they were deceased. They did not use the heart monitor. He didn't touch them. And it was dark in there. The only light they had was the officer had his flashlight. So can you imagine how eerie that is to go into a dark house and shine a light and see somebody? Hannah Gilley was shot so many times in the face, y'all. She was one that had some of the most gunshot wounds to her face. And I think that kind of spoke volumes a little bit. The other thing for me, by the way, and I'm just kind of all over the place because it's just 12:27, y'all. The other thing that really strikes me, you have Chris Sr. and Gary, and they're covered with a blanket. We haven't heard anything about Hannah Rhoden yet. We haven't heard anything about little Chris, whether he was covered. If we have, I've missed it. Dana had a pillow over her face. Frankie did not. Doesn't seem like Hannah Gilley did either. And I've always heard that when murderers cover up the face of somebody they have just killed, it's because there's a personal connection or they feel shame. I'll have to research that. There's like a whole thing. Maybe we'll do an episode on things killers do and why. But I thought that was interesting that these two weren't covered up, but Dana Rhoden was. And then you have Chris Sr. and Gary. So the sergeant saw Frankie's boys, and the oldest was kind of running around in the yard. The infant was covered in blood, and they checked to make sure he didn't have any injuries. He said he was the one that said the diaper was just saturated with blood. The Ruger, who's the baby, was in the front yard being held by Bobby Joe. The EMT was on the scene total for 1 to 2 hours, and then Sheriff Reeder came on and staged them in another area. So on cross-exam, it was really brief. He asked if he knew if they had rigor mortis, which is stiffening after death. And the EMT said he didn't touch them, so he wouldn't know. He said, and the defense attorney said, observing Frankie's arm, was it stiff? And he said, I couldn't tell from a distance. So that was everybody today that testified. With it being off camera, it can get hard. I love covering live trials. It is my jam. That's how I cut my teeth in the true crime world, was live tweeting trials. So when I can't see it or hear it, it's so frustrating, but it's what the judge ordered. Of course, he still thinks MySpace is a thing, so take it for what it's worth. Don't forget, guys, tomorrow, actually, Look, I'm gonna be laying in the bed at 3 a.m. Eastern when this Lori Vallow Sins of Our Mother drops, and I'm just gonna be like, whatever, click. So yeah, I need to go to bed now. It's 12:30. So I'm sorry it's late. Just life happened, y'all. Between kittens getting neutered and this little dude right here. Oh, I played that Sills and Croft song, Hummingbird, after he flew away. I was low-key sad, but it's actually a felony if you keep one in your house because they migrate. So I don't want to go to Pokey for some little hummingbird that wasn't quicker than a kitty cat. So, anyways, I'm out, y'all. I'm going to bed. I'll be back tomorrow with wrapping up this testimony. And check this out. If you don't have Netflix, no worries. I'm going to summarize all the good parts for you right here. Maybe do, I don't know. I'm saying 2 now tomorrow because I'm being really ambitious. But if not, we're going to do some bonus episodes over the weekend to break down the Netflix Sins of Our Mother that comes out in 2.5 hours. All right, guys, y'all are all asleep. Who am I kidding? Except for you West Coasters. What's up? All right. Have a good rest of your night.